There are disasters that unfold slowly, and then there are disasters that arrive all at once. This was the second kind. When reports confirmed that a major dam had failed, the scale of what followed became almost impossible to process.
我一脚拐你碰到了呀，就给我下回。
你这车还跑嘞，你看，我操，这真他要开的。
Within hours, controlled water turned into uncontrolled force. Reservoir levels that once symbolized security became the source of devastation. And, downstream, entire communities had no time to argue with gravity. Water doesn't hesitate when barriers disappear.
It all started in mid-July 2020. Floodwaters didn't...
A wall built to hold back millions of tons of pressure suddenly gave way, and the release was immediate. A surge moved outward, swallowing riverbanks, fields, roads, everything in its path.
我整啊？你怎么跑这嘞？
Sirens echoed through towns as emergency alerts ordered evacuation. But in events like this, minutes matter, and minutes disappear fast. More than 680,000 people have been displaced. Silt and debris settled across wide That number is not just a statistic. It represents cities partially emptied, neighborhoods abandoned, families forced to leave homes behind with no guarantee of what will remain when they return. In low-lying districts, floodwater rose rapidly, pushing into residential blocks and commercial streets. Vehicles were swept aside. Ground floors vanished beneath churning brown currents. Bridges were overtaken, first some closing, others failing as foundations were undermined. Rural roads disappeared entirely under moving water. Entire transport networks fractured in a matter of hours, cutting off supply lines and slowing rescue operations. When infrastructure fails at this scale, the crisis compounds itself. Electricity collapsed in multiple regions as substations flooded and power lines were brought down. Water treatment facilities struggled. Communications faltered. Darkness fell over districts still surrounded by rising water, compounding fear with uncertainty. The human response was immediate. Emergency crews deployed across affected provinces. Boats navigated through streets that had become rivers. Helicopters surveyed the damage from above, scanning for stranded residents on rooftops and upper floors. Temporary shelters filled quickly schools, stadiums, civic centers transformed into evacuation hubs. But dam failures carry a different weight than seasonal floods. They carry the shock of structural collapse. A dam is engineered to withstand pressure, be the line between safety and catastrophe. When that line breaks, the psychological impact runs as deep as the water itself. Trust in infrastructure falters. Confidence in control weakens. The event doesn't just flood land, it floods perception. Beyond the immediate destruction, secondary threats remain. Saturated soil increases the risk of landslides. Rivers downstream remain volatile. Reservoir systems elsewhere are placed under scrutiny. Recovery is not a moment, it is a process measured in months, possibly years. And yet, amid the scale of displacement, there is movement toward stability. Relief teams continue to deliver food, clean water, medical aid. Engineers assess structural damage. Crews begin the long task of clearing debris and restoring basic services. Families gather what they can salvage and prepare for the uncertain path ahead. This is what no mercy looks like in real terms. Not cinematic explosions, not sudden fire, but water released in force, overwhelming systems, displacing hundreds of thousands, redrawing maps in hours. The full cost of this disaster will take time to understand. Economic impact, structural loss, environmental consequences,
flooded neighborhoods,
head, human toll. Each will emerge gradually as floodwaters recede and assessments begin. For now, the priority remains clear: safety, shelter, stabilization. You're watching Weather Floods, where we break down the facts behind the world's most powerful flood events. If you found this report helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss a calm, clear update. At first, it was just rain. That's what everyone thought. Then the ground stopped obeying. Water didn't fall, it arrived, everywhere at once, as if the city had been condemned without warning. Streets dissolved under the pressure. Lanes vanished. Traffic lights blinked, confused, before surrendering to darkness. And then the cars began to move. Not driven, not guided, but taken.
For his funds.
In a matter of hours,
Thousands of vehicles were ripped from stillness and pushed into motion by something far stronger than engines or brakes. Tires lost meaning. Steering became a lie. Steel slid, slammed, stacked, and spun as the streets transformed into violent rivers. What had once been order turned into panic in seconds. Inside those cars were people who had made ordinary decisions go home. Take this route? Wait a minute longer. None of them expected the road to betray them. None of them expected the city itself to turn hostile. Water climbed doors, pressed against windows, filled cabins with the sound of something unstoppable. Some cars collided and locked together, forming islands of twisted metal. Others were dragged away alone, swallowed by currents leading into tunnels, underpasses, and darkness with no bottom. And beneath it all lurked the silent killer: electricity. The water became charged. Alive. One wrong step, one unseen wire, and survival ended without noise or drama. No scream, no warning, just absence. Sirens echoed distant, helpless, too late. Rescue lights flickered at the edge of streets that no longer existed. The city had crossed a line where help could not move fast enough. This was not chaos by accident. This was collapse by design when infrastructure meets a force it was never built to face. When the rain finally weakened, the damage remained. Cars lay scattered like broken memories, mud-coated walls, signs, and silence. The air smelled of oil, wet metal, and fear that hadn't yet faded. This is how control ends. Not with fire, not with explosions, but with water patient, heavy, relentless. It doesn't chase you. It waits for you to hesitate. And if there is one lesson burned into this night, it is this: when the water starts to move, leave early. When it starts to rise, don't argue. Because the city will not save you, and nature never negotiates. End of the city, Russia. It didn't feel like a storm. It felt like the world had lost patience. The sky turned the color of iron. No warning, no gradual change. Just darkness thick, heavy, absolute. Then the rain began.
Preparing for future mountain floods. Left isolated.
Not rain meant to water the earth. Rain meant to erase it. It fell in sheets, slamming into the city with a violence that drowned out thought. Streets disappeared first. Then intersections, and the idea of direction itself. Water rose everywhere at once, as if the ground had opened and the city was bleeding upward.
Evening of July 2nd continued into July 3rd.
Cars stalled. Engines screamed, then died. Metal hissed as cold water swallowed heat, sparks, and hope. And then the city started to move. Not people. The city. Thousands of vehicles were lifted, pushed, dragged. They slid sideways like corpses on ice. They collided, crushed, locked together in piles of twisted steel. What once represented safety door frames, glass became prisons. Inside those cars, fear had nowhere to go. Windows held. Doors resisted. And the water kept rising. The flood did not rush. It claimed, it poured into tunnels and underground arteries, filling them like lungs drowning from the inside. Parking garages became graves. Underpasses became traps with no ceiling. Some tried to run. Some tried to wait. Some made the wrong decision and never got a second chance. Electricity vanished, then returned in the worst way possible. Power lines fell into the water. The flood itself became alive, charged, deadly. What looked like a step to safety became a final step. Sirens wailed distant, helpless, fading. Rescue vehicles stopped where roads no longer existed. Boats arrived too late for some. The city screamed not with sound, but with destruction. Buildings stood, but everything beneath them failed. The ground betrayed weight. The water rewrote maps in minutes. This was no longer weather. This was collapse. A system built over decades undone in hours. Concrete meant nothing. Steel meant nothing. Planning meant nothing. Only elevation mattered. Only timing mattered. Only instinct mattered. And instinct, under panic, is cruel. When the rain finally weakened, the silence was worse. Cars lay stacked like offerings to something ancient and angry. Mud covered everything's streets, walls, memories. The city smelled of oil, wet metal, and loss. This is what the end looks like. Not fire from the sky, not explosions, but water endless, patient, unstoppable. Nature doesn't rage like humans do. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It simply takes back what it allowed us to borrow. And when it does, there is no negotiation. Remember this: if the water is moving, it is stronger than you. If it is rising, it will not wait. And if the city begins to drown, run early, or you won't run at all. city was never meant to drown. St. Petersburg built on rivers, canals, and history has always lived beside water. But on this day, the water did not stay beside the city. It came for it. The sky collapsed without warning. Clouds stacked low and heavy, sealing the horizon shut. Rain began to fall not gently, not steadily but violently, as if poured from above with intent. Within minutes, streets turned glossy, then black, then alive. Water surged through avenues once filled with traffic. Canals overflowed their stone edges. Drainage systems failed one by one, surrendering to a force moving faster than design, faster than prediction. Then came the sound, not thunder, but movement. A deep, roaring current rushed through the streets, dragging everything with it. Cars stalled, engines died, doors locked. What moments earlier were safe, ordinary vehicles became floating traps. Thousands of cars were caught. At first, they resisted, tires gripping asphalt, drivers pressing brakes in disbelief. Then the water reached the undercarriages, and resistance ended. Vehicles began to slide. Slowly at first, then suddenly, violently, metal scraped against metal. Glass shattered. Cars collided, stacked, spun, and vanished into the flood like debris in a nightmare.
Personnel were dispatched to flood-hit zones, to help with evacuation. Electricity and
Some were flipped sideways. Others were pushed head-on, powerless, carried wherever the current decided. In seconds, order turned into chaos, and chaos turned into terror. Inside those vehicles, time fractured. Every second stretched. Every decision came too late or too early. Opening a door meant inviting the flood inside. Staying meant trusting a machine already defeated. The water showed no mercy. It swallowed parking lots, underground passages. Tunnels. It erased lanes, signs, and boundaries, turning the city into a single, relentless river. And hidden beneath the surface was an even greater threat: electricity. Power lines fell, substations flooded. Invisible currents charged the water itself. What looked like a shallow escape became lethal in an instant. Rescue teams struggled to move. Boats replaced ambulances. Sirens echoed through streets that no longer functioned as streets. St. Petersburg was no longer a city. It was a battlefield between human infrastructure and raw, unstoppable force. This was not just heavy rain. This was extreme weather, amplified by climate instability, geography, and timing. Too much water, too little time, too many lives caught in between. And the most terrifying truth of all, nothing here broke suddenly. Everything failed gradually, until it failed completely. The storm eventually weakened. The rain slowed. The water receded. But what remained was devastation. Wrecked vehicles piled like discarded toys. Streets layered in mud and debris. And a silence heavier than the storm itself. Because once you've seen a city drown, you never forget how fragile control truly is. Nature does not announce when it changes the rules. It simply does. And when it does, survival depends not on strength, but on awareness, timing, and humility. Remember this: if the water is moving, do not challenge it. If the level is rising, leave early. And if the city tells you to stop, listen, because FEM loading doesn't need hours. Sometimes, it only needs minutes.
你睇睇cái quầy phúng cái hậu kiếm không? Mày ở đây
那女孩子刮飞了，娘的气死了！我操！多多安也去。站住！哦，让车来！两个车。